On February 12 at 9:42 a.m., Armie Hammer's family podcast goes live, and the first 90 seconds become the legal pressure point. The opening includes dates, locations, and someone I knew. That precision ignites real liability stakes. By 10:17 a.m., clips circulate as text screenshots, stripped of tone and context. A single paraphrased line spreads faster than the audio. When narration becomes captions, meaning mutates instantly, and the risk profile escalates in seconds. At 11:58 a.m., a legal checklist kicks in: defamation, false light, privacy, and interference claims. Not every story is actionable, but specificity sharpens the blade. The more verifiable the claim sounds, the heavier the consequence becomes. At 12:34 p.m., the tension shifts from what is said to what is implied. If identities are not named but obvious through details, the law can still treat it as identification. The podcast doesn't need names to create exposure. Hard cut, numbers. A mid-tier show can hit 250,000 plays in a day with the right controversy. Scale matters because damages often scale with reach. Every repost becomes a multiplier, and multipliers attract attorneys. Here's the twist: calm delivery can be more dangerous than chaos. A steady voice makes statements sound deliberate, researched, and factual. That perception changes how listeners interpret credibility, and interpretation drives real-world fallout. At 2:17 p.m., the episode references a private message with a precise timestamp and punctuation. Quoting texts feels persuasive, but it also invites authentication fights. Once a message is cited, people demand proof, and proof demands receipts. In liability terms, I felt it's safer than they did. That grammatical shift turns emotion into allegation. When a podcast crosses that line mid-sentence, it creates a clean target for legal arguments. At 6:03 p.m., commentary channels repeat the same clip, adding dramatic labels. The original statement becomes a headline-shaped weapon. Even if the host stays vague, the ecosystem fills the blanks, and the blanks become the story. Pattern interrupt: stop the audio and look at the subtitles. Captions remove hesitation, soften qualifiers, and sharpen certainty. A 5-second clip can sound like a sworn declaration when the maybe gets cropped out. The next morning, February 13 at 8:06 a.m., sponsors become the silent pressure point. Brand partners avoid uncertainty, not just guilt. When ad placements sit beside controversy, the money hesitates, and hesitation changes behavior fast. The next morning, February 13 at 8:06 a.m., sponsors become the silent pressure point. Brand partners avoid uncertainty, not just guilt. When ad placements sit beside controversy, the money hesitates, and hesitation changes behavior fast. At 10:22 a.m., insurance language enters the room. Media liability policies can exclude knowing falsity or intentional injury. If a podcast is framed as deliberate accusation, coverage can become a battlefield, and battles get expensive. At 10:22 a.m., insurance language enters the room. Media liability policies can exclude knowing falsity or intentional injury. If a podcast is framed as deliberate accusation, coverage can become a battlefield, and battles get expensive. At 3:33 p.m., the episode's editing style becomes evidence. Long pauses, dramatic music, and loaded framing can suggest malice. Even without explicit accusations, tone can imply intent, and intent is the engine of many claims. February 14 at 12:01 a.m., a follow-up teaser drops and doubles the attention. Teasers are designed to hook, but hooks create expectations. Once the audience expects truth bombs, every line is judged as if it's evidence. White medium star viral moment: at 7:07 p.m., the host says, "If my truth burns bridges, I light the match." That sentence turns the story from explanation into defiance. It becomes a clip, a caption, and a rallying cry within minutes. February 15 at 9:18 a.m., the legal risk condenses into 3 words: provable, harmful, identifiable. If all 3 align, exposure increases sharply. The podcast can be emotionally persuasive while legally vulnerable at the same time. At 4:44 p.m., private negotiations become the likely path: cease and desist letters, corrections, retractions, and edits. The public sees drama, but lawyers see leverage. One quiet email can change the entire trajectory overnight. As February 16 at 11:59 p.m. hits, the audio remains archived, clipped, and searchable forever. The bigger the reach, the longer the shadow. The next episode's framing becomes the hinge point that determines whether this stays talk or becomes action. February 17, 8:12 a.m. A minor correction appears in the episode description, 3 words quietly edited. It looks harmless. But metadata logs preserve the original phrasing, and digital footprints don't forget. Someone notices the discrepancy immediately. The fix is meant to calm the storm. Instead, it confirms awareness. If language needed adjustment, critics argue, what does that imply about the first version? The attempt to soften tone sharpens suspicion overnight. February 18, 1:44 p.m. A cease and desist letter reportedly lands in an inbox. It isn't public. Not yet. But internal circles tighten. Once formal notice enters the chat, every sentence becomes potential evidence. The small problem becomes bigger, it's no longer about reputation. It's about provability. Archived clips, transcripts, timestamps, all preserved. The earlier 2:17 p.m. text reference resurfaces, and now authentication becomes unavoidable. Pattern interrupt. Meanwhile, a former business associate listens silently at 11:03 p.m., forwarding clips to counsel. They were never named. But proximity alone pulls them into orbit. The circle of exposure widens without warning. February 19, 9:28 a.m. A statement draft begins circulating internally. Measured. Neutral. Careful. But drafting a response signals escalation. Once rebuttals form, positions harden, and reconciliation drifts further out of reach. The attempt to clarify only magnifies attention. Episode 3 promises context. Context often means more detail. More detail means more claims. The spiral tightens, and each added explanation multiplies the exposure. The cover-up whispers begin. Private calls. Coordinated messaging. Strategic silence. But silence leaves space, and space fills with speculation. And speculation spreads faster than any official narrative ever could. The cover-up whispers begin. Private calls. Coordinated messaging. Strategic silence. But silence leaves space, and space fills with speculation. And speculation spreads faster than any official narrative ever could. Time jump, February 22, 10:52 a.m. Insurance Counsel allegedly reviews policy exclusions again. The small podcast now triggers corporate-level scrutiny. This is no longer a story, it's a potential liability event. February 23, 3:07 p.m. A former guest distances themselves publicly. One sentence, I was unaware. That disclaimer signals fracture. Alliances shift quietly, and isolation begins to take shape. February 24, 8:33 p.m. A private mediation proposal reportedly enters discussion. Mediation means both sides see risk. And when both sides see risk, the battlefield shifts from public narrative to legal negotiation. February 24, 8:33 p.m. A private mediation proposal reportedly enters discussion. Mediation means both sides see risk. And when both sides see risk, the battlefield shifts from public narrative to legal negotiation. The earlier edit at 8:12 a.m. now looks less cosmetic and more tactical. Each micro-adjustment paints a pattern. Patterns suggest intent. And intent is the word that keeps resurfacing behind closed doors. Direct address. You see how this escalates. A minor clarification morphs into authentication battles, policy reviews, and mediation talks. What started as narrative control now resembles structural risk. And we're only 5 episodes in. White medium star viral moment, February 25, 7:07 p.m. A leaked email allegedly states, "We knew the exposure when we pressed publish." That single line reframes everything from accident to awareness, and it detonates across feeds instantly. The person everyone assumed was reacting may have anticipated it all along. That reversal rattles supporters and critics alike. If awareness existed at launch, the legal calculus shifts dramatically overnight. February 26, 9:19 a.m. Crisis PR drafts new language emphasizing personal narrative. But redefining intent after publication looks reactive. Reactive strategies rarely calm storms, they validate them. The mediation rumor becomes public chatter. Once whispers hit open air, leverage shifts. Negotiations thrive in privacy, spectacle complicates everything. and spectacle is now unavoidable. February 27, 11:11 p.m. The spiral reaches a new threshold. Edits, statements, leaks, distancing, all documented. The podcast meant to reclaim control now sits under magnified scrutiny, and the next move could decide everything. February 28, 8:03 a.m. The notification appears. Subject line, filed. He stares at the screen. Doesn't blink. Reads it once. Then again. The room feels smaller, and the air changes instantly. 8:04 a.m. His thumb hovers over the message. He opens the attachment slowly. PDF loads. First page. His name centered in bold. The words, complaint for defamation, sit under it, unblinking. 8:05 a.m. He scrolls. Paragraph 12 references the 2:17 p.m. text. Paragraph 18 quotes the light the match line. Each timestamp we've tracked now sits inside numbered allegations. The spiral hardens into litigation. 8:06 a.m. He stops scrolling. Hand trembles slightly. The room is silent except for the faint hum of a refrigerator in the next room. For 12 full seconds, he doesn't move at all. 8:07 a.m. He forwards the email to counsel with 2 words, call now. No explanation. No emotion. Just those 2 words, and that decision changes the trajectory of everything. 14 million views in 36 hours. By 9:12 a.m., his immediate circle knows. Family group chat lights up. A business partner sends a single message, is this real? No one uses emojis. No one jokes. The tone shifts permanently. 9:47 a.m. Social media detonates. The leaked email quote, "We knew the exposure," spreads first. Screenshots stack. Edits loop the 7:07 p.m. clip. Within 22 minutes, his name trends in 11 regions. By 11:03 a.m., headlines crystallize the narrative, intent, awareness, exposure. The mediation rumor resurfaces beside the complaint filing date. Public opinion splits sharply, and the framing begins to calcify. February 28, 4:44 p.m. No public statement. No denial. No apology. Just silence. The complaint sits active, the episodes remain online, and the mediation talks hang unresolved. The next move could detonate everything again.